So, we have spoken about two different types of mikvah, a ma'ayan and the boir. The boir is the one that is full of rainwater. The ma'ayan is the one that comes from a spring in the ground. The boir is not allowed to have any zoichlin. It's not allowed to have any flowing water. It can't have any leaks. We said that before, so we spoke about the concept of how the filters work and what one is supposed to do about that. There's a new type of filter where the water stays, where it filters the water stays inside the actual mikvah, but filters is like a big discussion how that should be not a problem of zoichlin. We also spoke about mayim she'uvim. Mayim she'uvim is water that has already been disconnected from its natural place where it came from. For example, it was put in a bucket and it was poured into a mikvah. And we said how if you don't have a kosher mikvah and you've got even one lug, 1 liter, three lugim of mayim she'uvim, so that will disqualify a mikvah. So if you don't have the full 40 saw yet, and you've got some water that was poured into it, and then you have the rest of the mikvah fill up, that's going to be a problem, mayim she'uvim. And we said therefore one has to be very careful when it comes to mikvahos, how exactly the water gets from where it's collected in the roof, or from where it would come up from the bottom. What sort of pipes are used in order to make sure that it gets to where it's supposed to get, because if you have certain types of pipes where there is a place of a clay kibble where it can receive it over there, certain joints in certain pipes, that could be a problem. And this idea of mayim she'uvim, it's a machlokes whether that's something which is awesome in HaTorah or whether that's something which is just an issue midrabanan. So today, what we're going to see is how, practically speaking, you can have mikvah water. So we're going to speak Be'ez Hashem about hamshocha, hashaka, and zariah, which are like three main tools that are going to be used in order to validate a mikvah. And what hamshocha does, which literally means to draw something along, is going to be a way of koshering mayim she'uvim. But we'll see that this is something which is very debated. So the main principle of hashaka is as follows. If you pour water on the ground outside the mikvah, and now it goes from the ground into the mikvah, so to what extent can that kosher your mayim she'uvim? If you have mayim she'uvim and you brought it along, but then you poured it on the ground, does that make it like natural water again, and take away the psul of mayim she'uvim? So there's a Gemara in Tumura Daf Yud Beis that says that as long as the mikveh already has 20 sa'ah of rainwater, now we know a mikveh has to have 40 sa'ah of rainwater, and we said 40 sa'ah of rainwater or of spring water is approximately, they say, 1,000 liters. Once you've got 1,000 liters, that's 40 sa'ah. So the Gemara says once you've got 20 sa'ah, so then Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that you can kosher it, and you can make 40 sa'ah by taking another amount. More than 20 sa'ah means you've got a roiv of 40 sa'ah. You can take the rest of the water in buckets from wherever you like, and you pour it along the ground, and then it goes in, and that's going to make your mikvah kosher. There's a machlokes exactly how far it has to go on the ground. But this is the way that the Rambam Hilchot Mikvahos paskins like this, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and in Yeridea, Reish Aleph, the Shulchan Aruch also allows such a thing. So that is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So technically speaking, you could use hamshocha to fill up the minority part of a mikvah. The Radbaz in his Tshuvas says you're not allowed to. He understands that Gemara, that it's only b'di'eved. B'di'eved b'diavad, if you had a reiv of a mikvah and then it happened, then that would be okay. And this is the way that Achronim, including Ramesha Feinstein in Igros Moshe and others, that's how they pasken. So you can't lachatchila be using this hamshacha, certainly not for the whole mikvah, but for a minority of a mikvah. But if it was like that, then that's going to be okay. We're going to be using this later, so that's why we're mentioning this at this point. How far it does have to go, as we say, is a machlokes. Is it just a kol shehu, or is it shloisha tfachim? The Shulchan Aruch paskens in Reish Yud that you do need to have shloisha tfachim in order for it to be considered a hamshacha. So that's approximately between 24 and 30 centimeters. There's also another machlokes. What sort of ground is necessary? Does it have to be the type that Shulchan Aruch says, like Roiv Rishonim, that you can use any surface, but there are others who say that it has to be that it can actually absorb water into it. Is it sort of like earth ground, in which case there's a machlokes, is concrete considered halachically earth even though it doesn't absorb anything or not? So that's another concrete cement, that's another discussion. Now, even though we've seen that really hamshacha isn't something that we're going to be using very often, most mikvahs, they use hamshacha as an added precaution. There's an expression in English, belts and braces. But you use a belt to keep your hosen up. You don't want your trousers to fall down. Alternatively, you can use braces. Nowadays, I don't see many people use shleikus, yeah? You don't see many people use, my father's a fine pair of braces. You don't see many people use braces these days? Some use braces. And there's an expression, belts and braces. If you want to make sure these trousers, they're not going anywhere fast, so you have belts and braces. So what many mikvahs do is that most mikvahs use this as an added precaution because we've seen that Mayim She'uvim itself, it's a machlokes whether Mayim She'uvim is Doraisa or is D'Rabbanan. Even if Mayim She'uvim is going to be a Doraisa problem, if you have the water before it goes into the mikvah, it goes along, if you see it the way that it enters into the mikvah, it's not normally just from a tap. It's normally, it goes on, could be some concrete, could be some stone, something like that, until it goes down into it. So that way, the water that's going in is also a hamshacha. Even if Mayim She'uvim is going to be osa min ha'torah, it's going to invalidate the mikvah. But if you've got a hamshacha, maybe that takes it to a d'Rabbanan, and that is going to make it like an added precaution. Now, l'maisa hamshacha, as we've said, wouldn't be enough just to use tap water. Otherwise, it'd be very easy to make mikvahs. You just run the tap, let the water go in. But they use it just as an added precaution. So, how do you use tap water to make a mikvah, and how, practically speaking, are mikvahs made? Is the $1 million question. Now that we've had all the background, so practically speaking, so there's hashokon, there's zriya. So hashokah literally means, from the word nashika, is a kiss. So what they do is they have the main boyer hashaka, which is the actual pit that the rainwater comes in. So rainwater is collected on the roof. It's actually in England quite quick that a person would be able to collect 40 sa'ah of rainwater, especially if it's over a big area, over a large roof. It can be done very, very quickly. The rainwater is going to come down, being very careful exactly which sort of pipes are used, as discussed. It's going to come down into some sort of a container. Once you've got that container, that is kosher mikvah water, that a person could be tovel in that rainwater. The difficulty is, not you, but you might have friends who are a bit dirty, and if these people are going to be toveling in this same pool of rainwater, it's not going to be long before it's going to look like Hampstead Pond, and you won't be able to see anything down there at all, and it's going to be not geschmack to be inside of this. And this is what used to happen at the time of Chazal. If they just were toveling in one of these cisterns that was filled up by the rain, so people would tovel in it, but then they'd feel disgusting, and then they'd wash themselves with mayim she'uvim afterwards. They'd go and they'd just, with nice fresh water, and they'd wash themselves straight after the mikvah. And Chazal saw that people were getting the wrong end of the stick, and they thought that the ikar Tevila was just in the mayim she'uvim when they had the shower afterwards, when they had their wash down afterwards, and they didn't want to go in the dirty water. So they said that a person shouldn't have a shower straight away after the mikvah. For women, that's still something which is brought down, that they're better. They shouldn't have a shower directly after a mikvah. Maybe have one when they go home, but it shouldn't be directly. For men, it's more lenient. Though some are careful not to have a shower. Yeah, Rav Shlomo Zalman, they say, was makpid to have, he advised the shower before and after the mikvah, a shower before the mikvah for kavod habrius, a shower after the mikvah in case anyone didn't have kavod habrius. Certainly for men. So what they do to ensure that doesn't happen is they have one mikvah that has the rainwater in, and then they have another mikvah called the Bayer Tevila, which is the one that people actually immerse in. That's filled up with tap water. And they've got, and the Mishnah Mikvah, Perek Vov, says that as long as there's a hole which is the size of Shveiferes Hanoid. Shveiferes Hanoid, a noid is what, it was like the container that they would put, their wine in or something. And as long as the opening was Kshveiferes Hanoid, this opening of the container, which is a diameter where you could put 2 fingers into this, so then that is considered, if you have this pipe, this hole that runs between the boyer where the rainwater is and where the water is that you're immersing yourself, so then by them connecting,
Not the fingers, you need also to be able to do like that. It's not enough to stick like that.
Yeah, to be able to rotate them.
Yeah.
The Poskim say that it's between Reb Chaim Noah 1.5 inches. Yeah, it says comfortably fits 2 fingers. So you're right. So it would have to comfortably fit them. You'd be able to put them in. So once you've got that, then that kashers the water that's on the other side, that's in the Bar Tefillah, and that way people can immerse in the Bar Tefillah, and they can change that as often as they want. Whenever it gets dirty, they can change that, and there's no problem. And there's no problem. Now, do you have to keep this hole open, or is it okay to bung it up in between? So Rabbeinu Yerucham says that it has to remain open the whole time. When you're toveling in the Bar Tevila, which has the tap water in, it has to be that the pipe is open, that connects to the boyer, the boyer hashaka, the boyer that has the actual rainwater in. However, the Rosh and the Tur in Reish Aleph in Yeridea say that no, it can be closed. The Shulchan Aruch goes like these, like the Rosh and the Tur, and therefore once it's open just for a moment, afterwards you can close it, and anyone who tovels in this, what used to be tap water, it's now been transformed into mikvah water, and that would be okay. The Shach there says that wherever possible, you should keep it open in order to be yotzi, like the Rabbeinu Yerucham. And in the women's mikvahs, I was told that it is kept open. In the men's mikvahs, it's normally closed, which is Rav Rishonim, the Rosh and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. Though, if you go into mikvahs, sometimes you'll see some eager people. They'll pull out the bung whilst they're in there, and they'll put it back. In the mikvah in Golders Green, in Woodstock, corner of Woodstock and Golders Green Road, it always used to be there was a bung there, but I haven't seen that bung in since they revamped the mikveh. They don't use that anymore, because I think probably it just went missing the whole time. So they just do it without the plug in. Now, what's the downside of keeping the plug out? If you take the plug out, so then then the dirt that is going to be in the mikveh where people are toveling in will ultimately go into the other mikveh. That's going to be one issue. There might be another issue which we'll speak about a little bit later. But so for that reason, what happens is, practically speaking, is that even the water that they collect that has the rainwater in, every now and again, they change that and they let that water go out and they release more water that has accumulated on the roof. So they actually change the boyer that has the rainwater in every now and again in order to make sure that that should stay clean. It's very, very interesting that this whole machloikus, exactly how big this shveiferes hanoid is. Two fingers. When they came to Masada, they found that, and I've seen this. I went there. You can actually see the mikvah that they used in Masada, where you had this ancient Jewish, group that was there. Never what happened to them at the time of the Romans, but they have a mikvah, and the hole that they have, k'shveferes hanoid, is exactly the same as the Mishnah says. But what's interesting is that this mikvah they have there was from before the time of Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi. So it was even before the Mishnayos were written down. You see that they had the mikvah there using those things. It's very special to see. Though we don't look to archaeology or anything, to support our Mishnayos, but it's just a nice thing to see. So that is how Hashokah works. Now there's another way called Zuriya, which is very, very interesting. There's a mikvah Perek Vov, which speaks about a mountain. And there's one mikvah that's a little bit higher up, and then, so maybe like this, and then there's another mikvah that's a little bit below it. And the top mikvah is full of rainwater. So the upper one has 40 so'ah, it's wonderful, a person could tovel in it, it's great. And the lower one is going to be empty. So is there any way that you can kasha the lower one? So Zuriya is that the Mishnah says, if you pour buckets of water into the upper mikvah has got 40 so'ah of rainwater. The overflow that goes into the next one, once you pour the water into this kosher mikveh, it's already got 40 so'ah of kosher mikveh water. We've said that once it's got a 40 so'ah in, then if you have maim she'uvin that's poured into it after that doesn't invalidate it. So what happens is that you pour it into your mikveh water. The water that goes in becomes mikveh water. The overflow goes down into the lower pit, and you can do that as much as you want. And so you're pouring the water into the upper one. 40 so'ah of new water goes into the upper one. It displaces 40 so'ah that goes into the bottom one, and now, hey presto, you've got now 2 mikvahos, which is really interesting because your biological rainwater is now all over the place, but your halachic rainwater, mikvah water, has now doubled. So many mikvahos use this. We'll see that many mikvahs use both of these things, the hashokah and the zuriya. So that's belts and braces and double braces.
Isn't it just zuriya without hashokah?
Oh, so we'll see why zuriya by itself could be. There's some questions on it. So what many of them do is that you have next to your mikvah, on one side of the mikvah, you'll have the Mei Geshomim boyer that we just had that has the rainwater in. They do hashokah, but when they're filling the water, how does the water get in to the mikvah? How does the water get into the mikvah? So you could have just used the tap, filled it up, and then you've got the whole k'shveferes hanoid, like the opening of the container, the 2 fingers comfortably, yeah. And that should be enough. But what they do is in addition to the rainwater, the way that it's filled up is via another mikvah that is already there, apart from the hashokah, where they pass the water through an existing boyer that has hashokah water in, and that's called zuriya water in. That's called the boyer zuriya, and they fill up the boyer zuriya, and from that overflows into your mikvah that you are immersing in. So
it's easier to keep it cleaner, I guess. The Zriya, Torah Zriya.
Well, you're always going. That's going to be a factor, yes, because you're always remaking new mikvah water over here, and that is. So you're converting the Maim She'uvim into mikvah water. Zuriya is planting, and the idea is that the water is like replanted into this natural water. Yeah, you had Maim She'uvim, and it's like you're replanting it into the mikvah, and now it gets a new status, just like when something you plant grows and becomes something that was different than the way it was beforehand. It looked different, so too that's what's happening over here. Hashaka is you're connecting water to rainwater, whereas Zuriya, you're validating before it even enters the pool. It's already becoming mikvah water by the time it goes in. Okay. Now the Chasam Sofer and the Chazon Ish, they say that Zuriya is very, very good, and they're very, very happy with using this concept of Zuriya. And in pre-war Hungary, it was normally just Zuriya mikvahs. That's what they were using. So all they had to do was collect the rainwater once, yeah, and then they didn't do this hashoko business and kept another bow there. They would just have the rainwater once, and they'd continually be pouring water into that would then overflow into the mikvah that people were toveling in. Even though I told you that I remember seeing the hole in the mikvah in Masada, I've got there's in an essay published in Techumin, he says that in Masada they actually use Zuriya as well, and in Yerushalayim they saw some mikvahs Zuriya, some Hashaka, all these ancient mikvahs. But Lemaisa, as I say, in pre-war Europe, in Hungary, they used a lot of this Zuriya. Now, why is it that some like to do Hashaka as well? What is the issue with the Zuriya ones? So there are three big questions about how Zuriya is going to be working and how kosher Zuriya is. We've said previously that if you have a mikvah that does not have 40 saw of water in yet, so then once you've got 3 lug of mayim she'uvim, of drawn water, that is now getting validated, and it stops it from becoming a kosher mikvah. So if this bar tavila, so imagine you've got the boyer number 1, which has the original mikvah water, and you fill that up with new water, and it goes over into boyer number 2, where people immerse themselves in. If this already had 3 lug of Maim She'uvim when the Zuriya happened, if it already had 3 lug of this, which is 3 lug, we said is approximately 1 liter, we're machmir to say 3 lug is a little bit more than 1 liter. If it has 1 liter, then even when the water comes over, and the Zuriya water comes over, it's not going to be kosher, because you've already got 3 lug of Mayim She'uvim. So that could be a potential problem.
Your Mayim She'uvim, or even if it's mixed within the mikvah?
If it was not yet mikvah water, if you had some water that was in there and it wasn't mikvah water, and it was 1 liter of non-mikvah water, then anything that comes in afterwards cannot be used for mikvah water. So if you wipe it okay, and you make sure that it's completely empty when you fill it up, that's going to be fine. What the difficulty is that most mikvahs, they don't have a plug at the bottom, because if you have a plug, then there's the concern of zoichelin, right? That the water might just leak out. And if you're using a boyer, which is rainwater, and that has a leak, we said that's going to be a problem. So they don't use plugs in them. How do they get the water out? They use a pump. So every time you empty a mikvah, they have these really good pumps that it's like a vacuum cleaner that pumps out all the water. The trouble is that when you get to the end, there's normally like a bit of a backflow where you pull it out and then it sort of pulls out what it can, and then there's a bit that just resists gravity and goes back down. So it becomes Maim She'uvim, it goes back down into it, and then if you'd fill up the water with Zuriya over here, that could be problematic. So that's why the Minchas Yitzchok and others say that you always have to dry the mikveh by hand before with the towels to make sure that it's completely dry. And I remember Dain Lichtenstein telling me about a mikveh that he was involved in, that you'd be surprised how easy it is to have 1 liter of water over the whole mikveh. It's not totally dry, when they pour water from the Zriya into it, it could very easily be 1 liter. So that's something to be aware of, and that's why that's one of the reasons why Reb Chaim Noah and Reb Moshe Feinstein say that nowadays we should try and use both Hashaka and Zuriya, because the advantage of that is that even if there would be some water in when you are filling it up, which has been problematic in terms of the Zuriya, even if it was full Mayim She'uvim, once you open the pipe, K'shveiferes Hanoid, and there's Hashaka, and it connects, so then it's anyway going to be kosher als Hashaka, even if the Zuriya was problematic. Another issue with Zuriya is a kasha on the whole concept of Zuriya, how Zuriya works. Because we said that once this concept of Zoichlin, this concept of if you've got a boyer and it has water in, not a mayan, a spring water that comes out, even if it's flowing, that's going to be okay. But if it's going to be a boyer of rainwater, it cannot be flowing water. So the whole concept of Zuriya is problematic, because what you've got is you've got the mikvah number 1, which was the rainwater, and you're basically, as you're pouring the water that's going through from the first mikvah to the second mikvah, surely it's flowing out, and the whole status as a mikvah is obgefregt. There's a whole question on the whole status of a mikvah. Maybe this mikvah has become posel because it's got this zoichlin, because it's been flowing like this. So the Chazon Ish says, so a few answers for that. Number 1, that's why we also do this hamshocha that we spoke about beforehand, that if when you're pouring the water into the mikvah, if you're validating it by hamshocha even before it goes in, so it could be that it's already considered mikvah water anyway.
Doesn't it make it worse, lechora?
Why?
In theory, because you say sometimes said it's okay, so you do it like that. Once you do hamshocha lekula, it becomes ma'im zoichel and almost.
Well,
unless you know exactly. Yeah,
but it's no less. It's no more ma'im zoichelin than just pouring it in is also going to be ma'im zoichelin. So there are a few different techniques for this. Some say there's there are a few different answers, but I'll tell you what Moshe Feinstein says. Moshe Feinstein says that it's not a problem. We said before that if you have a mikvah that's leaking, and it's not a mayan, but it's a mikvah, yeah? So it's got the rainwater that's in it. If it's leaking, then it's a problem, because only a mayan can be flowing and not a bow. The way Rav Moshe Feinstein and other achronim learn that is that you can't tovel at that moment whilst it is leaking, but not that it invalidates the entire mikvah. So therefore they say that this whole Zeichlin thing is not a problem. Another issue regarding Zuriya is a concept called Nosan So'ah v'Notal So'ah. It's a mikvah, a Mishnah in Mikvahs Perek Zayin, which says what happens if you have a mikvah that has exactly 40 So'ah. 40 So'ah. And you add a So'ah of apple juice, of fruit juice. Let's say it's not a problem of changing the water's color, but you put in a So'ah of apple juice. And then you take away a So'ah of the rainwater. So notal so'ah, nosan so'ah, v'notal so'ah. So the Mishnah says that it's still kosher. it's still kosher, even though it doesn't have 40 sa'ah of rainwater. It has 39 sa'ah of rainwater and 1 sa'ah of fruit juice. That is going to be fine. But there's a Gemara in Yevamos Pei Beis that says that there's a limit on this. It has to be that at least 20 sa'ah, a roiv of the rainwater, still remains. But if you're going to be putting in the fruit juice and putting in a sa'ah of fruit juice, taking out a sa'ah of water, putting in a sa'ah of fruit juice, taking out a sa'ah of water, so that it's going to be 50% or more of the fruit juice, then that's going to be a problem. Okay. Now, does that apply just to fruit juice, or does that apply to mayim she'uvim as well? That's a big question. If it's just fruit juice, then fine. If we're doing zariah, the mayim she'uvim goes in, and there's no problem of nosan sa'ah v'notal sa'ah, because it's only a problem with fruit juice. But if you say that's a problem with mayim she'uvim as well, then every time you have zoichelin, every time you have zariah, a mikvah of zariah, you should have a problem over here, because the whole concept of zariah should be problematic. Now, most Rishonim say that it's only fruit juice, because fruit juice is not water. And so if you have this Gemara in Yevamos that says if you have a majority of the fruit juice that ends up in there, so then nosan sa'ah v'notal sa'ah is going to be problematic only if it's fruit juice. But if it's water, that's going to be okay, and there's no problem. But the Rambam in Hilchot Mikvah Perek Dalet and the Ravid, they say that it's even a problem of mayim she'uvim. That if you have mayim she'uvim, this drawn water, it goes in the mikvah, it goes out of the mikvah and spills over into our new mikvah number 2 that people can immerse in, that if that's going to be happening, we said beforehand that the magic of a Borer Zariah is that all the water that comes in becomes mikvah water. So you're like changing the whole thing to mikvah water. According to the Rambam and the Ravid, that's not going to be true. That's only going to be true up to half, up to just less than half. But according to them, every Borer Zariah, every mikvah that's using zariah is going to be a problem. Now, the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Aleph in Yeridea, and most of the poskim go like Rov Rishonim over here, not like the Rambam and the Ravid, and therefore that's going to be okay. That's going to be okay. But there's a shach that brings a tashbetz who says that you should try and accommodate the strict opinion of the Rambam and the Ravid. So that means that any mikvah that uses a Borer Zariah is not going to be kosher according to the Rambam and the Ravid. And that's why Rav Moshe Feinstein says that that's why we use hashokah and we use Zariah as well. So even if it doesn't work because of the Zariah, according to the Rambam and the Ravid, but it'll still be okay according to because you've got the hashokah. Chazon Ish disagrees with this, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and he says that just Zariah and hamshocha is going to be sufficient. But lemaisa, you'll see that's why most of our mikvahs do use a concept of both.
And the reason why we do not rely on hashokah is because the hole is not open the whole time. Is there any other reason other than the hole being open the whole time? Is there any other reason?
Is there any other reason why hashokah should be a problem? So, Shalom. I'll come back to you on that next week, Bezim, because there's still a few more nekudas about Bor al Gabi Bor. There's just one more. There's one little bit more, and then we'll go to the yeah. Okay, we'll stop over here. Yeshakayach.